Hey guys, welcome back to my channel TechFit. This is Gar, and today we are back with another video in which we are going to look at how to create interactive plots in Jupyter Notebook. Now, I've been working in this field for almost a decade, and I think one key question that always comes up again when you're using Python, when to really use Plotly Dash, when to really use Jupyter Notebooks, or when to actually just use IDE. I think this is kind of my take on it, but yeah, I mean, people might have different opinion to it. What I do is if there's a new project that comes in, if it's a proof of concept, which is you're just trying to prove something that this could be useful in the long run and this could then be put into production, what I do is I usually tend to work with Jupyter Notebooks and try to write my research down because they are kind of marked down layouts, so I can actually put my results, which is my experimental data analysis, together, and I can actually build models in there and I can actually write about those models. So whenever I'm doing proof of concept, I usually tend to go with Jupyter Notebooks. When finalizing the model and putting that model into production, I take all the insights that I have acquired from that Jupyter Notebooks and actually bring it to the Python IDE, where I then in the end build the final models and convert these into Python files, and bringing those Python files in the server to automate the model. This is kind of like the usual structure that I follow, and then all the outputs that came out from that proof of concept, which is again all the visualization, then I kind of turn those visualizations into a Plotly Dash app, because then I can deploy that on server and basically have authentication on it and give access to the users so they can actually log in, they can actually see the output. Now I can actually also send my Jupyter Notebook, convert that into our markdown page and send that onto the email, but I do want my output to be connected to my data set. So because again, the models will be a real-time model and the data on the back of those models will be updating on an ongoing basis. So it's good to kind of pick that data or pick that visualizations out of Jupyter Notebook and actually put them into Plotly Dash app, where a user can actually log in and they can always interact with the data and they can always understand what the actual visualization looks like. So now we're going to jump into the Jupyter Notebook and we are going to try to build this plot and make it interactive for the end user. Now again, as you know, like what our goal is to actually send these files to the user in an HTML format or in a markdown format, and we want them to be able to interact with the plot. Now if you're using Plotly graphs, you can actually have a lot of interactivity anyway within the actual graph, but what I want to do is I want to actually change the underlying data as well, so they have access to change or filter the data basically, and they can actually see the visualizations when they have interacted with that plot. So without wasting any more time, let's jump on the Jupyter Notebook and we will see how we can actually make the Jupyter Notebook plots interactive. Okay, so first thing, we're going to get all our packages that we will be using in this. So I'm just going to say import. So we have our datetime panels, and I'm going to actually also import ipywidgets. And finally, because my plot is going to be a Plotly graph, so I'm actually going to get Plotly as well. Import display and import HTML. Okay, so we have all our dependencies now loaded. So we are going to move to the next level, where we are actually going to first of all import our dataset, and then the next thing we're going to get is we are actually going to build the plot. So I'm going to actually put that into a function, and what we are going to do is then we're going to see how we can add interactivity to that plot. Okay, so I got my file path. So my file path is, it's just a file which is widget_data.csv. I'm actually going to leave all the documentation on GitHub repo as well, so you don't have to copy paste anything from here. You can actually find the link on this video description. Okay, so the next thing we need is we're going to just create our data frame, which is going to be pd.read_csv, and we are going to pass our file path. Okay, and I do know I have a date column in this, so I'm just going to reformat it first. going to be pd dot to date time. And the format we want is it's going to be date first, then it's going to be the month, then it's going to be the year. And as you can see, we are saying year Y is capital because we want that to be full year, so it should be 2020 or 2021. And then finally, I'm just going to also pass the time. So I'm just going to get the, yeah, so that's going to be H. Okay, so we have reformatted our date. And what I'm going to do next is, so as you can see, my data is loaded. So I'm actually going to first of all show you the data as well. Okay, so as you can see within our data set, we have date, we have temperature, rain, themselves. So we have all the features around, which is again for weather. And we do have our demand column. Okay, so what I'm trying to see is I'm actually trying to create a plot in which I want to see what does the demand looks like against the temperature. So we have our the y-axis, which will be the temperature, and the x-axis, which will be the demand. So we can actually see on a plot how does actually demand reacts towards the temperature. And once we have created the plot, then I will actually put that into interactivity, how a user can actually pick a date. So again, that's why we have reformatted our date. So in this case, I want the user to be able to filter the date and say maybe see the data for only 1 year, see the data for 2 years, it's up to them. So I'm actually going to use that in this case. So let's start creating the plot first. So within the plot, I'm actually also going to start adding the interactivities. As you can see, we have taken our dependencies. So first of all, I'm going to create this variable, which is output is equal to widgets dot output. Then I'm actually going to first of all get, let's create a date picker. So date picker is basically, it's a widget, which is again, which basically it comes as like a date format where you can actually click on that and you can actually select the date you're looking at. dp, which is equal to widgets dot date picker. The value, which is going to be equal to, I'm actually going to pass a default value as well because I want to have this date picker to have a default value. So my plot is always generated based on that default value. So what I'm going to say is for this case, which is date time dot date, we're going to pass a default date, which is 2016-1-1. And what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to start creating my plot function. Let's name that function as temp plot. And we're going to pass our date within this function, which we can just name it as date selected. Okay, so first of all, within this function, what I want to do is I want to always, whenever we open, as we have saved our output, which is going to be the output of that widget, because once we click on that should generate an output. And what I want to do within that output, first of all, is I want to always clear the output before we actually recall that function again. So what we're going to say is output dot clear output. Then we are going to first of all get our data. In this case, what we're doing is we are creating a subset of our data, which by that I mean is df. So encapsulate that within, so we're going to filter our data set. So we're going to say, and we're going to filter it by date because that's our selection criteria. And what I want to do is if date is greater than, so the way I want this to work is anytime user gives a date input, anything that's there in our data frame which is greater than that date input, that should be visualized on a graph. So that's what we're going to say in this case, which is date is greater than pd dot to underscore date time date selected, which is again the variable that we have within our function call. And we're going to say selected. And we're going to also format it because we want to make sure the format is exact same as our previous format. So I can actually just copy this format. Okay, so the next thing we need the x variable, which is going to be for our plot. So I'm saying x is equal to subset, and we're going to say demand, because the x-axis is going to be the demand. So that's my demand variable, as you can see within my data frame. And my y-axis is going to be equal to subset, and we have the column which is temperature, so temp. Okay, so we got our x-axis and y-axis, so that's how our plot is going to get their data set from, which is again getting filtered as well based on the date, which is selected in date picker. And what I want to do then is I want to actually give the layout for that. So we're going to say layout, which is equal to go.layout, capital L. Actually, I'm going to give my plot title as well. So title is equal to, let's say maybe demand based on temperature. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is the x-axis, which is equal to, we're going to pass a dictionary in this, which is the title, which is going to be equal to, because we have our x-axis, that's going to be we can say that as electricity demand. And that demand is in megawatts. Next thing we need is the title for y-axis as well. So y-axis, which is going to be equal to date, and then we're just going to give the title to that. Let's make just the layout slightly more cleaner so I can understand it properly. And then the title for this would be temp, so the column is temperature, and then the value in units is Celsius, so we can just actually say temperature in brackets. Perfect. Then finally we can just close this. Okay, so we have our layout. I'm actually going to leave a comment here as well, just to make sure. So that is our layout. So we have our data, we have our layout. Now we are going to generate the figure based on that. So what I'm going to say is figure, which is FIG. We can just name it like that variable, which is equal to go.figure. And within that figure, we are going to pass our layout. So the layout, which is equal to layout as we created here. Okay, and the next thing we are going to do is we are creating the plot. So we are going to add our trace, because at the moment we have only added the title, which is again for the layout, and we have only worked on our data set. So what next we need is the actual trace. By the trace in Plotly, that I mean is that you're actually adding, if it's a scatter plot or if it's whatever kind of plot is, you're actually adding the data points, so you're adding a trace into this. So what we are going to say is, we'll actually leave the comment here, so it is add, we can call it maybe like scatter trace, and then finally what we're going to say is figure, which is our variable for the plot, dot add, and we're going to say trace. We're going to say go dot scatter, and the S is capital. The mode is going to be equal to markers, and the x value is equal to the x that we have created in our call here, which is x is equal to subset of demand. Similarly, we are also going to do y, which is equal to y. And then finally, we are going to say, which is marker. How we want our marker to look like. So we're going to pass a dictionary, where we'll be actually making the colors, what color we want that marker to be as. So dict is equal to color, which we can actually pick one color. I'm going to go with this one. Okay, so we are going to a dark turquoise color. And then within that, what I want is the size of that as well. So we're going to pass a size which is equal to 6. I'm going to pass the opacity as well, which we're just going to say is equal to 0.4. So as you can see, we're just trying to first of all get the plot ready. Once we have the plot ready, we can actually see how the interactivity is working and how do we bind the plot with the actual function call. So first, we have to get this out of the way. So we have this. And then finally, we are going to say is line. And the color for that would be CR. We're going to pick another color for this. What I'm doing is I'm actually, just to make it more visible, I'm actually creating a line boundary on that round circles for scatter plot. So I'm just saying that to be as per void. Okay, that's grand. That should do. And then the width of that line on that circle should be equal to 1, as I want it to be really small. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to close that. And we're going to just say show legend. Just false. We don't want to see the legend in this case. And then finally, what we're going to say then is, so once you can see this, we have our plot ready. In this case, we have, first of all, our data set, which is a subset of the data set. Then we also have our layout. And after the layout, then we have our figure call. And then based on that figure, we're just adding a trace on that figure. And once we have added that, the next thing we are going to do, because our plot is now ready. So what I want to do is the with call, which is again, what we're going to say is with output, which is our output display call. What we're going to say in this case is display and figure dot show. Perfect. So once we have done that, now we can see that we have our date picker on the top. We have our widgets.output call, which is again, we are only displaying it when the with output is being called. And then based on that, we are actually going to show the figure. But at the moment, there is no interactivity. First of all, we only have the date picker. We haven't actually displayed the date picker yet as well. So what I want to do, first of all, is I'm actually going to create an event handler in this case. So we are actually going to show you what event handler is. So in this case, it would be, we're just going to name this as event handler. Perfect. I'm going to pass a function, which is going to be another function, which is date. We can call it as event handler. And we have a value variable in this. So what I'm going to say is the value obviously is going to be the value of that actual call which is coming from the display variable itself. So what we're going to say within this function is we're going to run our function based on whenever this event handler function is called. So in this case, I'm actually going to pass my function, which is this one, tempLot. So once we go back into this tempLot and we're at the value which we're going to pass, which is the date value, it's going to be equal to value dot new. And let's look at what this value dot new is. So we are going to say, first of all, because we want to bind this event handler with the actual input that a user is going to select through the widgets dot date picker. So what we're going to say in this case is, as you remember, we created our date picker variable to be dp. We can actually show this first of all as well. So we can just say something like display, and we are going to display which is going to be the dp. Now, just to kind of like, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you in another cell as well. So if I just say dp display dp, you can see what it does is it actually brings out another call on the bottom where it's actually, one second, oh yeah, sorry, I haven't defined it yet. So I'm just going to copy this because I want to just demonstrate first what it looks like. And as you can see, there's a default date that's already been selected in this widget, which is on the date picker widget, which is 2016-11, which we have passed in our date picker value call. So I can actually select my date based on this picker, and I can select any date, and that should just change to that date. So what I want to do in this call is I'm actually going to bind these two together, which is my display DP. And I want to bind this with my event handler call and pass that value in this case here. So what I'm going to do for this is, let's first maybe just call it as binding. You can just say binding event handler with the date picker. Okay. So we're going to bind them together. So what we do, how do we bind them? We actually observe the event. So if user is coming in and clicking on that input, we're observing that. So we're going to say dp.observe. And within that observe, we are going to call our function. So whenever we see that button to be clicked, what we want to do is we want to call date event handler, which is actually our function call as we have created here. So we can just copy that. And event handler, and the name is equal to, names is equal to value. So what we're doing is we are taking the value, which is again the names within this dp.observe. So dp.observe is a function call. Once you call this function, you should have a value parameter in this, which is what we are looking at. Names is equal to value. And we're passing that names equal to value in this date event handler. What happens is that value whenever, so the way it's going to, the structure of the code it's going to work is we have a display dp, which is our input widget, which where a user can go in and select the date. Once they click on some specific date, what happens is it is observing an event. Once that it observes the event that somebody user has changed the value, it's actually going to pass that value in this date underscore event handler, which is another function. When that function gets the call and the value which we're passing is names equal to value, which is the actual date, that date goes into this value. And what we're doing then is we're calling our plot function, and we're just saying value.new, which means taking the more recent value, which is the recent value come out of that date picker, and we're passing that date into our main function, which is the plot function. And once we pass the date, it actually clears the output first. So it's going to be the new output of that graph, and then it basically will subset the data based on that date, and that will actually generate that plot. So we have seen how that interactivity works. Now actually I can kind of delete this one, we don't need to see this. And what we are going to say is we're going to actually create another one, because I do have only displayed my DP, which is the date picker. I do want to display the output. So we're going to say display output, which is the widgets.output call that we have created initially, and then we have cleared it, which is the output.clear output. Then we have also done in this case is once we have the figure, we're actually doing display figure.show. So with that figure, I want to actually display here, which is display output. And what we can do next is we're actually going to try run this. Yeah, they're not defined yet. So we're going to run this. As you can see, we have a date picker here, and I'm actually going to run this. So that should actually generate my plot now, and based on whatever value I have selected. So I'm actually going to say something like 2. So as you can see, we are getting this error. So let's kind of debug this error as well. So we can see that we are getting the error as a date format doesn't match. Okay, so I shouldn't have turned that, because again, the date format that was from the CSV file. Now the date format is actually different, which is actually Y, and there's dash, and then there is M and dash and D. Okay, so once I change this value, as you can see, if I go now and try to run this, that should just pick up the date and the exact value. And I'm actually going to run this plot again. And what we're going to do now is we're going to try change the value again, and that should just do the trick. And as you can see, I'll select a new date in this case. So I'll just say, for an example, I actually do see some difference in this plot. I'm actually going to go on more recent years. So I'm actually going to say 2019, select January 1st. So what's going to happen is this data set here should be then filtered with less amount of data, because our clause is that the subset is based on anything that's greater than that date. So what I'm actually going to do is select one. So as you can see, it's observing that event, and as you can see, the data has reduced in amount, where you can exactly see that that there's less data points in comparison to previous ones. I'm actually going to, if I'm looking at this data by year on year, actually I can just select 2020 and see what that data would look like. So as you can see, the data points are less now, and I can see the trend that's happening within just 1 year, and I can actually keep adding now years on it and see what the trend looks like. Now you can use something similar. You can actually maybe add 2 drop down menus or 2 date pickers, and you can actually create that range, or you can actually create a slider, which is again a date range slider. So you can actually pick what date to what date you want to see your data from, and exact same logic. But what you're going to do is when you're doing this subset, you're not going to subset by one date. You're actually going to do a subset based on 2 date. So just to kind of create this Jupyter Notebook into more lookalike feel of a dashboard, the one way you can actually do that is by hiding all the code on the background. You can actually write your own HTML. That's what in this case we're doing is the code shows the variable, which is again default is true. And then we are actually going into this function, which is again code underscore toggle. And in this case, what we're trying to do is if code show, which again means that the default value is true, so then it is true. And in this case, the code will be hidden whenever you open this Jupyter Notebook in the start. And again, once you click on this form, which is again the action button that we have here, which is again the type of that button is submit. And what we're doing in this action is which is again click here on toggle on and off the code. What happens is when you click on that, that actually clicks on this, which again turns the value of the code underscore show from true to false. And that's when actually the if statement kicks in, which again when we are going into the code show, and in this case if code show, which means if it is true, then happens is hide it. But in this case it's not true because you have just clicked on the button. Then actually goes to the else statement where we are saying div.input, which is again .show. So I'm actually going to run this. So as you can see, what happens is the code is hidden in this case. So whenever you click on this button, which is the context here, what happens to this button is, which is again code show. So code show.hide, and if you click it again, the code show.show. So it actually creates this interactivity in the actual Jupyter Notebook that you can actually hide your code as well. So in this case, what we're going to do next is once we have our headings on this and our code is kind of like they're in the background, I can actually just hide this. So as you can see, this is something that looks more clear for the end user, because again, you can have multiple plots. You don't really have to have one plot in this case. You can add multiple plots. You can actually add multiple widgets as well. You can have drop-down menus. You can have selected criteria based on what you want to show in your interactive notebook. And the user can actually just go back and interact with the plot. So say for an example, I go back to 2018 and he wants to see more data. He can actually click on this first, and as you can see, the plot itself then tries to get all that data, and then all more inputs are then generated on this case. And as you can see, there's more data inputs on the plot. So this kind of look and feel of the Jupyter Notebook just makes it a lot easier for the user to interact with the plot. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I know this kind of work you can also do in Plotly Dash, but whereas Jupyter Notebook just makes it much more easier, you can actually take this Jupyter Notebook and send it on an email to your end user. And if you need to see more videos like this, definitely give it a thumbs up, and do subscribe to my channel if you're not subscribed yet, and click on that notification sign so whenever I create a new video you will get a notification for my new video. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.